Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
I'm Jason Miller. Coming up on tonight's Evan Miller Report, the Islamic State group has welcomed the pledge by sister terrorist group Boko Haram. This, as Iraqi forces battle Islamic State for Tikrit in Iraq. Also on tonight's program, Gaza imports produce is going over to Israel since the Hamas has taken over. And in Iran tonight, their supreme leader warns against a deceitful arrest. This as Germany lashes out at the GOP here in the U.S. for their letter that they wrote against Iran. Also on tonight's program, we welcome former Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann on the program. She talks Iran, the issues in D.C. regarding the joint houses and Senate of not getting anything done. Those topics and more as we discuss that with the former Congresswoman on tonight's program. Also, Corey Evan on the broadcast tonight. Corey, what do you have coming up?
I thank you as always, Jay. I have the latest revelations in the downing of MH Flight 17, and it's not looking good for the rebels. I deal with homeless shelters in New York and Jeb Bush in Florida, at least his emails, in our continuing battle against global socialism. The business world will never let it go, now that Disney have announced a Frozen sequel.
Gorilla-rama.
And the Duchess of Cambridge makes her appearance in Downton Abbey. All that and more is coming up right now on the Evan Miller Report, your conservative news source.
Live from Southern California, this is the Evan Miller Report. Jason Miller with news and politics, Corey Evan with business and entertainment. This is the Evan Miller Report on SHR Media. Here now, Jason Miller.
And a very good evening on this Thursday, March the 12th, 2015. I'm Jason Miller. A very warm welcome to the program tonight. And ladies and gentlemen, if you did not hear it in the teaser, coming up at the bottom of the hour at 8:30 Eastern, 5:30 Pacific time, former Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann will join us to talk about what is going on in D.C. and other political issues and issues going on around the world regarding the United States tonight. So we welcome you to the program. Again, that interview coming up in less than 30 minutes time here on the Evan Miller Report. So we hope you stay tuned tonight. Looking forward to speaking with the former Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann tonight. But first, ladies and gentlemen, we start off with world news tonight. The Islamic State group welcomed a pledge of allegiance made to it by terrorist group Boko Haram and vowed to press with this expansion, according to an audio tape released today, reportedly from its spokesman. He said, quote, "We announce to you the good news of the expansion of the Caliphate to West Africa because the Caliphate has accepted the allegiance of our brothers of the Sunni group for preaching and the jihad," said ISIS spokesperson Mohammed al-Adiri in a message using the Arabic name for Nigeria's Boko Haram extremist group. In the tape of some 30 minutes, al-Adiri urges Muslims to join militants in West Africa and play down victories by the U.S.-led coalition and Iraqi forces against his group. More on Iraq in just a moment. The Sunni radical Sunni movement has seized large swaths of Iraq and Syria and declared an Islamic caliphate there. It also has drawn expressions of allegiance from jihadists in Egypt and Libya as well. On Saturday, an audio tape attributed to Boko Haram leader Abdur Sharik said, "We announce our allegiance to the caliphate of the Muslim Ibrahim al-Wadi Ibrahim al-Sunni al-Ashuri," referring to the ISIS leader Abu Barak al-Baghdadi. Security analysts have said that the pledge may only have propaganda value in the short term, but could lead to closer links in the future. And over to Iraq now, where Iraqi troops clashed along two fronts with Islamic State militants in Tikrit on Thursday as rockets and mortars echoed across Saddam Hussein's hometown a day after soldiers and allied Shiite militiamen swept into the Sunni city north of Baghdad. Recapturing Tikrit is seen as a key step toward rolling back the gains of Islamic State, which seized much of the northern and western Iraq in a blitz last summer and now controls about a third of both Iraq and Syria. The offensive will also serve as a major crucible for Iraqi forces, which collapsed under extremist initial offensive last year and now face one of the Sunni militant group's biggest strongholds. Iraqi forces entered Tikrit for the first time on Wednesday from the north and south. On Thursday, they were fighting their way through the city and expected to reach the center within 3 to 4 days, according to Lieutenant General Abdul Wahid al-Sudani, the commander of the Tikrit operation. The ISIS militants were trying to repel the Iraqi forces with snipers, suicide car bombs, heavy machine guns, and mortars, said al-Sadi, speaking to the AP on the front lines. Tikrit, the capital of the Saladin province, sits on the Tigris River about 130 kilometers or 80 miles north of Baghdad. Several of Saddam's palaces still remain there, and supporters of the deceased dictator are believed to have played a key role in the Islamic State group's seizure of the city last year. On to Gaza tonight, where Israeli authorities have now allowed the import of Gaza produce on Thursday for the first time since Hamas seized control of that territory back in 2007. A move that will aid the Palestinian Strip's battered economy and help pious Jews observe a biblical farming Sabbath. Some 27 tons of tornadoes and 5 tons of eggplants. Excuse me, I said tornadoes, I meant tomatoes. Could be easily confused according to what this AP writer wrote in here, so my apologies. Those tomatoes and 5 tons of eggplants were cleared to leave Gaza for Israel, Palestinian officials and Gaza merchants said. Exporting to Israel is better, but insufficient, said Gaza merchant Hosir Shadarda, who oversaw the preparation of half-ripe tomatoes and large eggplants for export at his warehouse. Before Hamas took over the seaside territory nearly 8 years ago, Gaza merchants used to export hundreds of tons of vegetables to Israel on a daily basis. Over to Iran now, where their supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, on Thursday warned against deceitful world powers and branded a letter from Republican lawmakers as a sign of America's internal collapse just days before nuclear talks resumed. Khamenei's broadside came as U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry left Washington, D.C. on a trip which will see him once again huddle with his Iranian counterpart in Switzerland, aiming to settle a deal to curtail Tehran's nuclear program. With the nuclear negotiations between Iran and world powers in the so-called P5+1 group now seem to be the critical endgame, political tensions are soaring in the U.S. among Republicans opposed to rapprochement with America's old foe. Meanwhile, Germany's foreign minister hit out at U.S. Republican senators Thursday for sending a letter to Iran over the nuclear talks, fearing it could undermine Tehran's confidence in the negotiation at a critical juncture. Frank-Walter Steinmeier is just the latest senior figure either abroad or in D.C. to salvage the high controversial missive, which has been branded a crude political stunt by its opponents. This is just not an issue of American domestic politics, but it affects the negotiations we are holding in Geneva, Steinmeier told journalists in the U.S. Capitol before meeting lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Obviously, mistrust is growing on the Iranian side if we are serious with the negotiations, he said. Steinmeier also added it would be good if the letter of the 47 senators no longer causes any more disturbance in the negotiations. Meanwhile, Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Bob Corker from Tennessee warned President Obama today against any potential nuclear deal with Iran to the UN Security Council while bypassing Congress. He said, quote, "There are now reports that your administration is contemplating taking an agreement or aspects of it to the United Nations Security Council for a vote," Corker said in a letter to Obama. He continued to say, quote, "Enabling the United Nations to consider an agreement or portions of it while simultaneously threatening to veto legislation that would enable Congress to do the same is a direct affront to the American people and seeks to undermine Congress's appropriate role," he said in the letter, which was made public by his office. Corker is the main author of legislation aimed at giving Congress an up or down vote on any accord that results from the negotiations. The White House has threatened to veto the measure, which currently does not have enough support to overcome the president's rejection. All right, folks, I'll be back in just a couple of minutes with some of the D.C. news, including the FBI chief warning of Islamic State recruits and lone wolf attacks by social media. But first, I send it up to my colleague, Corey Evan, up in Los Angeles, and he has some of the day's other news. Corey, take it away.
Jay, villagers in eastern Ukraine have told Reuters they saw a missile flying directly overhead just before a Malaysian airliner was shot out of the sky on July 17th last year, providing the most detailed accounts to date that suggest it was fired from territory held by pro-Russian rebels. The accounts from 4 villagers of Chervony Shavten, which was then and is now controlled by the rebels, are significant because they indicate the rocket was in the early stages of its flight path. That would mean it must have been launched from rebel ground nearby, challenging the suggestion of Moscow and the separatists that the plane was brought down by the Ukrainian military. At the time, the nearest Ukrainian-held area was about 3.7 miles away. Ukraine and its Western allies have said it was the rebels who shot down the airliner using a Russian-made Buk anti-aircraft missile. All 298 people on board were killed. Until now, videos, photographs, and accounts from residents have pointed to a Buk battery being delivered to the rebel-held town of Snizhny, about 7 kilometers north of Chervony Shavten, on July 17th, and then driven away from the area sometime later. Its precise location at the time the plane was shot down has never been confirmed. Ukraine's defense ministry declined to comment for this story. A top rebel commander, Andrei Perchin, said the separatists did not have any weapon capable of downing a plane at cruise altitude. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said it was up to a Dutch-led international investigation to determine what happened. Next up from the BBC, U.S. officials have ended a search and rescue mission for 7 Marines and 4 soldiers likely killed in a helicopter crash in Florida. The helicopter crashed near Pensacola during a training exercise from Eglin Air Base. Divers have found the wreckage of a UH-60 helicopter known as Black Hawk that crashed amid dense fog on Tuesday. But continuing bad weather on Thursday prevented the recovery of the flight recorder from wreckage about 25 feet deep. The Louisiana National Guard has confirmed 2 of their soldiers died and believed 2 more remain within the aircraft. And officials at Camp Lejeune, where the Marines were based, said they were not hopeful of finding any survivors. Much of the area was enveloped in fog on Tuesday evening, said Katie Moore with the National Weather Service in Tallahassee, with visibility at 2 miles or less. During a hearing in Washington on Wednesday, Defense Secretary Ashton Carter said, quote, "All of our thoughts and prayers are with them and their families as the search and rescue operation continues. The accident is under investigation." Dozens of airmen walked the nearby beach on Thursday to search for debris as the Coast Guard searched the water. Pieces of clothing and bits of the UH-60 Black Hawk have washed up on shore, and homeowners have contacted the military to pick it up. That's according to Mike Spates, a base spokesman. Stay with us here at the Evan Miller Report. We will keep an eye on those 2 stories, and we'll bring you details as they become available. An American health worker who contracted Ebola while volunteering in Africa will be admitted to a secure treatment center at the National Institutes of Health, the agency announced Thursday. This according to the AP. The patient was expected to arrive Friday at the NIH Research Hospital in Bethesda after being transported to the U.S. in isolation on a chartered plane. The patient's name, age, and gender have not been released. The patient had been volunteering at the Ebola treatment center in Sierra Leone. The NIH did not release any further details about the patient. The agency has one of the few containment facilities nationwide that are set up to treat Ebola patients. Previously, an American nurse was treated there after she contracted Ebola while caring for a Liberian man who died at a Dallas hospital. The nurse, Nina Pham, survived and is now Ebola-free. The treatment facility at the NIH is staffed by specialists in infectious disease and critical care and is designed to prevent the spread of highly contagious viruses, including Ebola. The World Health Organization estimated Thursday that the virus has killed more than 10,000 people, mostly in the West African nations of Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. The current outbreak is the largest ever for the disease. While deaths have slowed dramatically in recent months, the virus appears stubbornly entrenched in parts of Guinea and Sierra Leone. Next up, the trigger man in the Pamela Smart murder trial was granted parole Thursday, nearly 25 years after he killed his school instructor's husband and launched a global spectacle packed with lurid details of sex and manipulation. William Flynn was 16 years old and known as Billy in 1990 when he and 3 teenage friends carried out what prosecutors said was Pamela Smart's plot to murder Greg Smart. Flynn pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 28 years to life in prison, minus time served before trial. A judge in 2008 reduced his sentence by 3 years to credit him for good behavior in prison. The trial was a media circus and one of the first high-profile cases about a sexual affair between an instructor and a student. It inspired the Joyce Maynard novel To Die For, which in turn was made into a movie starring Nicole Kidman. The board granted Flynn parole on his first attempt Thursday, his 41st birthday. He has been in a Maine prison and participated in the hearing by telephone, telling the board that he'd always be haunted by the killing. Yeah, I bet you would, Mr. Flynn. Anyway, Pamela Smart, who was 22 when her husband was killed, was convicted of being an accomplice to first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole. She admitted seducing the boy, but said she didn't plan her husband's murder. According to trial testimony, Smart was one of Flynn's instructors in a self-awareness program at Winnicott High School in Hampton when she first seduced him when he was 15. She told him she needed her husband killed because she feared she would lose everything if they divorced. Flynn testified in Smart's 1991 trial that she threatened to break up with him if he didn't kill her husband. I will read no more of this because, honestly, I think that's enough for you to get the idea just how disgusting this story really is. Bad taste in my mouth, at least. Speaking of which, I've got 2 items to bring you in our continuing battle against global socialism. The New York City homeless shelter system that was supposed to provide a refuge for families with children instead forced some of them to live in squalid conditions that included a dead rat in an apartment, garbage strewn in hallways and stairways, and a puddle of urine in one building's only working elevator.
Ew.
These findings were among hundreds of health and safety violations cited in a 54-page report released Thursday morning by the city's Department of Investigation to the New York Times. This following a probe of the shelter system at the request of Mayor Bill de Blasio. The Department of Homeless Services, which houses 11,900 families, currently operates 145 shelters and 16 other temporary housing sites known as clusters, according to the report. However, the report emphasized that these problems were not new, and in fact were the result of decades of neglect. It also noted that the Department of Homeless Services had already taken steps to address some of the concerns. The Department of Homeless Services said it had closed 2 of the sites. In a statement, Gilbert Taylor, the department's commissioner, said, quote, "We have already begun implementing corrective actions in the areas referenced in the report, and pressing problems have either been addressed or are in the process of being corrected," unquote. Yeah, right. They say they investigated 25 shelters and cluster sites, working alongside inspectors from the fire department, the Department of Buildings, and other investigative agencies. And together they found a total of 621 city-issued violations, according to the report.
Ooh, I'm dying!
This whole year-long investigation they launched into the homeless shelter system, I don't think much is going to come of it, especially since the city has other fish to fry. And among the many thousands of emails Jeb Bush received as Florida governor are a string of notes from campaign donors asking for favors and making suggestions, according to the AP. Invariably, Bush responded quickly. Sometimes he appointed a person a donor had recommended for a position. Other times he rejected advice about a piece of legislation. It's an insight into Bush's work as governor that's possible only because his emails are open for review, something not yet available for those sent and received by Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State. Like Clinton, the frontrunner for the Democratic nomination, Bush used a personal email address and private server. But positioning himself as a transparent candidate if he runs for the Republican nomination, he has posted online more than 275,000 emails from his 2 terms in office. A review by the AP of Bush's emails found that prominent donors to Bush and his family regularly urged him to appoint certain candidates for judgeships, public boards, and other committees. Bush spokeswoman Christy Campbell said it was not uncommon for the public to make such suggestions to Bush, and the recommendations were routed through appropriate channels. Did fundraisers carry special influence? No, absolutely not, Campbell said. She didn't respond to AP's questions about specific emails involving 2 fundraisers, but one of them, Mark Gazzetta, said Bush denied his requests just as frequently as he granted them. Bush freely gave out his personal email during his time in office and often received notes of inquiry, complaint, and thanks. Last month, Bush put the emails he said were related to his work in state government on a website, a move he and his aides said was designed to show his administration was open and in touch with constituents. But of course that's because the state of Florida requires him to release his emails. and I'm hoping that there's some sort of clause in the law that says that Miss Clinton must do the same. So, where in the city is there safety for the souls of families? Why didn't the NSA spot Jeb Bush's and Hillary Clinton's emails before we did in the media? And can someone tell me the phone number for 1-800-LONE-MART again? Stay tuned for developments in our continuing battle against global socialism. And seriously, Jay, I'm surprised the NSA didn't spot all of Jeb Bush's emails before he released his, so I wonder what they know about Hillary's emails.
Thank you very much, Corey Evan. And the response to your question, I don't know how much they know, but they must know something. And of course, we'll discuss those emails and more with Hillary Clinton, with former Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, coming up in about 10 minutes' time here on the Evan Miller Report. All right, some D.C. news for you now, briefly. The radicalization of Americans by Islamic State and other groups, partially through sophisticated use of social media, is a top concern for the FBI as it grapples with evolving terrorism threats, said Director James Corney on Thursday. Like other militant groups, Islamic State, also known as ISIL to some, has called for lone wolf attacks in Western countries and has specifically encouraged attacks on soldiers, law enforcement officers, and intelligence committee, Corney said at an appropriations subcommittee budget hearing. Corney referred to the group's efforts to recruit Americans to join ISIS fighting in Syria and Iraq, then have them return to the United States to commit acts of terrorism. He said, quote, "This possesses an enormous challenge to us to find the people who are responding to that siren song." U.S. National Intelligence Director James Clapper said earlier this month about 180 Americans have traveled to Syria to join Islamic militants, and about 40 have returned to the United States. The U.S. government's Witness Protection Program has provided new identities and new communities for federal witnesses who may be at risk. But what you don't know is that some of those protected witnesses are also sexual predators. And there are new communities. Are they formed? The short answer, not usually. This, according to a new investigation. There are now at least 4 sex offenders in the program who have received a new name and a new home. But the Department of Justice did not use adequate safeguards to protect and notify the public and law enforcement about the risk posed, according to a new DOJ Inspector General report released today. The Department of Justice Inspector General released a scathing and heavily redacted report criticizing the Federal Witness Protection Program for not taking sufficient steps to mitigate threats posed by sex offenders in the program, as well as sex offenders recently released from the program. Some of them even committed their crimes while in the program. The crimes of some of those protected by the program include rape and sexual assault of children. And we at the Evan Miller Report thought you should know. Not that we trust the Department of Justice on anything these days. Who's in charge of it? Oh yeah, you guessed it, Eric Holder, who cares more about Ferguson than he does about sex offenders moving into your neighborhood. And that's this newsman's opinion. Moving on tonight, and Hillary Clinton's back in the news, of course, piling on more embarrassment for Clinton amid a row about her emails. U.S. officials revealed today that during her time as Secretary of State, she had a government-issued cell phone. According to spokeswoman and BS artist Jan Pazecki from the State Department, she said Clinton was not issued a State Department BlackBerry, and that wasn't a requirement. No one is required to be issued a State Department BlackBerry, she said. The revelation is likely to raise more concerns about national security, as well as speculation that the former First Lady may have been hiding information that could embarrass her in the 2016 presidential elections. And the photo that became an internet name, Hillary Rodham Clinton wearing sunglasses and staring at her BlackBerry, troubles Republicans on the House Committee investigating the deadly attacks in Benghazi, Libya, for what they say is an incomprehensible omission. Chairman Trey Gowdy from South Carolina wants to know why the panel has no emails from October the 18th, 2011, the day the photo was taken as Clinton. Then the Secretary of State was en route to Tripoli. In fact, the committee says it has no emails at all from Clinton's trip to Libya, which occurred just days before longtime Libyan ruler Muammar Gaddafi was killed. 11 months later, in September 2012, terror attacks on the U.S. mission in Benghazi killed U.S. Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 other Americans. All right, folks, it's time to get the latest on the business news. Let's go ahead and send it over to Corey Evan. He got what's happened on the markets today.
I thank you as always, Jay. The Dow is up 259 points today at 17,895. The Nasdaq following suit up 43 points at 48.93, and the S&P up 25 big ones at 2065. The number of people seeking unemployment benefits in the U.S. fell sharply last week, a sign that strong hiring will likely continue. Weekly applications for unemployment dropped 36,000 to a seasonally adjusted 289,000, the Labor Department said Thursday. The drop nearly reversed a large increase from last month, which likely occurred because of cold weather and snowstorms. The 4-week average, a less volatile measure, fell 3,750 to 302,250. The average has dropped nearly 9% in the past year. Applications are a proxy for layoffs. The decline indicates companies are confident enough to hold on to their staffs and hire more workers. Weekly applications had risen by 40,000 last month. Economists blame most of that rise on harsh winter weather that closed schools and shut down construction sites, causing temporary layoffs. The economy has faltered a bit in recent months, growing much more slowly than the 4.8% annual rate that it reached last spring and summer. Growth was just 2.2% in final 3 months last year, and many economists expect similarly modest growth in the first 3 months of this year. All this coming to us from the Detroit News. You can blame this union strike for bringing up gas prices at the pump. But according to Reuters, the United Steelworkers Union and oil companies have reached a tentative deal to end the largest U.S. refinery strike in 35 years, the labor group and people familiar with the negotiations said on Thursday. The new agreement would be for 4 years, a year longer than previous agreements, several people told Reuters. The deal, which still needs to be ratified, may not end strikes right away at all refineries that have suffered walkouts, as local union chapters could still need to work out pending issues. The tentative deal contains language that addresses worker fatigue, which is tied to accidents, and the use of contractors versus unionized labor. It also safeguards gains made in previous contracts, the union and sources said. They added that annual wage increases would likely be between 2% and 3%. Lead industry negotiator Royal Dutch Shell, when asked about the pact, said it had nothing to add. 12 refineries with a fifth of U.S. refining capacity have been hit by strikes during the last 40 days. Companies have responded by calling in temporary workers. The contract would also cover refineries owned by ExxonMobil, Tesoro, Valero, Chevron, and other companies. On Wednesday, in a message to its members, the union said it was assembling its policy committee, which represents the rank and file, to review proposals from industry during contract talks. That move was widely seen as a signal that the strike may be nearing an end as the union pushed for higher wages and what it called better safety practices in a new pact for about 60 plants. Let's just hope that none of those plants end up on seconds from disaster, or whatever they call it these days. And from the BBC, Disney has announced it will produce a sequel to its runaway hit Frozen, which last year became the highest-grossing animated film of all time.
Mega total super thrilladelic.
The Oscar-winning picture made over $1.25 billion at box offices worldwide and led to record sales of related merchandise, which I still work with during the day. Frozen 2 will reunite the team behind the original feature, including director Chris Buck, writer Jennifer Lee, and producer Peter Del Vecchio. The studio didn't name a release date, but shares in parent company Walt Disney were up by almost 4% following the news. Toy maker Mattel, which currently owns the license to sell Frozen products, saw its shares rise by almost 5%. Last month, Disney credited the continuing success of toys based on Frozen for an incredibly strong quarter. In December, Frozen became iTunes' biggest-selling movie of all time, while the soundtrack sold more than any other album in the US in 2014. Additionally, DVD and Blu-ray sales of the animation broke the 3 million mark on the first day of their release. So way to go, Disney, for recognizing that a sequel needed to be made. It sounded like you were going to leave it as a one-off, but I'm glad you had a change of heart before it ended up frozen. Okay, I'll let it go. Just as I will let go of this business report and send it back to Jason Miller. So how about it, Jay? Frozen really putting any financial woes on ice for Disney.
Certainly does, Corey. So we're looking forward to that sequel coming out. Frozen, of course, coming into theaters soon. That date's still waiting to be announced. And, of course, we're looking forward to that movie coming out. All right, folks, it's the big interview of the week here on the SHR Media Networks and the Evan Miller Report. Joining us in her first exclusive radio interview since she left Congress is former Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann of the great state of Minnesota. And I know the way you guys say it in Minnesota, Michelle, probably is a lot different than we folks here in Southern California usually say it.
Well, as I always say, it is the accent everyone wished they had. It's called Minnesota.
See, and I will never, ever say that right, being from the West Coast. We thank you for joining us. Quick story before we discuss politics. I happened to meet you twice, once at an Eagle Forum event in San Diego, and then once during the last presidential campaign in 2012 when you were running for president over at the Tonight Show with Jay Leno. I happened to be one of the audience members in the audience, and when you were speaking about one of your primaries, I happened to be the one who broke the trend and decided to say that you would be winning one of the primaries over there, and the NBC people over there were not too kind to me in saying that you were going to win that primary, but sure enough, you won that primary that you were talking about, that Jay was bringing up, and so shows to tell you that the Evan Miller Report can predict certain elections.
Well, congratulations, batting 1,000.
Yes, absolutely. We try our best here, and of course, everybody wants to know. The first question I got to ask you is, will you be running for president again?
Well, not today. I don't have a plan right now to do that. I'm definitely involved, definitely weighing in. I just was in Washington, D.C. yesterday, and I meet with different presidential candidates on a somewhat regular basis, more informal. As someone who's gone through this before, I'm very keen on making sure that a Republican wins in 2016. If there's anything that Barack Obama has shown us over the last 6+ years, it is the power and breadth of the presidency. And he has shown us, he has taken that power beyond all possible imagination that our founders had of what that power would be like, but we certainly can't allow a Hillary Clinton to have that power for the next 8 years.
Well, you bring up Hillary Clinton. So glad you did. She's in a bit of a controversy, not exactly the right way to start off a presidential campaign. You can certainly speak to this, Michelle. What's your opinions of her this current email scandal going on with her and the State Department when she was Secretary of State?
Well, I think it's very likely that Hillary Clinton has committed a criminal act because she was subject to federal record-keeping requirements. I think it's patently obvious that she intentionally chose to evade those regulations. And in light of that, I think she's in real trouble. We just found out from Time magazine today that Hillary hired lawyers. Her lawyers put together a list of names and key search words. Through those 62,000 emails, they went through, they hit a button to conduct a search, and anything that didn't fit those names or those key words were deleted. The emails that she deleted were not opened. No eyes this is what the report says, no eyes looked at them. So what Hillary told us in her Kabuki Theater press conference on Tuesday is that 100% of all government emails were handed over and 100% of personal emails were deleted. So that's pixie dust that she's trying to have all of us believe that there was 100% infallibility on the search term list of her lawyers. It's absolutely impossible that that happened. And so clearly, now Hillary has put herself in a position where there will have to be a criminal probe, and the Justice Department, in my opinion, has no other option. They'll have to open up a criminal probe on the former Secretary of State, and her private email server will have to be subpoenaed, and forensics will have to be completed on it.
Now, you running as president, even the people on the GOP side, along with the liberals, went after you. You went through a presidential process of course, your emails as your time as Minnesota Senator and as Congresswoman were looked at, every detail. Take us through a little bit how through a government person's email and how that can be easily scrutinized and how easily someone can mix up their email address so easily and break federal law.
Well, I think, I'm not an expert on the federal records requirements, and I don't pretend to be. The rules that the Obama administration had for their own departments were very clear. The secretary knew those rules. She emailed the employees under her about those rules and admonished them to follow them, to the point where even the U.S. ambassador from Kenya was removed in part for failing to follow the record-keeping requirements on emails. So this is well beyond hypocrisy on Secretary of State Clinton's part. I believe that now she may have moved into a federal criminal jurisdiction, and the question really now is whether the Obama Justice Department will apply equal treatment under the law to the former Secretary of State. We've seen instances where it appears that there are politically selected prosecutions of people who are not in the favor of the White House. For instance, Senator Menendez and others who have been selected by this White House for prosecution. But in this case, Hillary Clinton cannot be above the law. She has to be held to it, just like anyone else. And so she's certainly not starting out on the happiest foot with the beginning of her what appears to be a very bumpy ride on her way to the White House.
Okay. And I want to bring up you were on the Intelligence Committee as your time as Congresswoman, and our D.C. Bureau put the question to me to ask you, if you had the chance to question Hillary Clinton on Benghazi, what were some of the questions you would have asked her? Because obviously there is a string of emails related to this scandal with Libya that aren't even available. And they, so far today, according to a report by the AP, Chairman Trey Gowdy, who was heading that Benghazi committee, has now subpoenaed Hillary Clinton and her emails. He wants to know where those emails are. What's your opinion on that?
Well, again, I think that it's very instructive what Time Magazine reported today. The fact that Hillary Clinton's lawyers put together a list that has names and keywords on it, and based upon that list and an arrogant presumption of perfect infallibility, they conducted a search and deleted all emails that didn't have that list. Clearly, if I was on the Benghazi Select Committee or if I was on the Intelligence Committee, I would want to know what names were on the list that the lawyers put together and what were the key words that were on the list when they ran the search. Were the words Benghazi in that list? Was the word video in that list? Hillary Clinton, just because of Benghazi alone, in my mind, is disqualified as commander-in-chief. This was her big test, and she failed it. She failed it both in making sure that those under her employ in the State Department would be kept free from harm. And by that, I have personally seen the notebook that had all of the threats in it regarding Benghazi. There were thousands and thousands of threat warnings that year in 2012 about the dangerous conditions in Benghazi. All of our allied partners had pulled out their teams and their crews because they knew how dangerous this was. Our State Department people asked for more security in 2012 because of the dangerous conditions and because the Benghazi compound had already been attacked numerous times in 2012. Not only were those pleas for help ignored by Hillary Clinton, she also pulled out security that was there. So they were less secure on September 11, 2012 than even before when the compound was under attack earlier during the year. The second point is that she did not have a plan in place to rescue people in one of the most dangerous parts of the world. So we know now when the attack happened, we were told later that it would take well over 20 hours to even mount any sort of a rescue effort. Well, that was unrealistic, and she allowed that to stand. We don't know where Hillary Clinton was that evening. We don't know who she called, whether or not she did speak to the commander-in-chief, where the President of the United States was. And then we need to know why afterwards she was one of the chief people who continued to perpetuate the lie that it was a video that started the Benghazi problem, when in fact it was a terrorist assault. Hillary Clinton knew literally within minutes of the assault that this was an attack that was underway. It didn't take long for her to know. She knew immediately. She was in Washington, D.C., and no one should forget, in 2008, Hillary Clinton ran a famous ad about a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning. And in the ad, the phone rang, and the question was asked, who will answer the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning? And she tried to infer that she would be better prepared to deal with an emergency than Barack Obama. Well, the phone call came at the 3 o'clock hour, only it was in the 3 o'clock hour in the afternoon, not in the middle of the night, and that was Washington, D.C. time, where Hillary Clinton was when Benghazi broke out. So she had every advantage at her fingertips, and yet we saw 4 innocent Americans die, and we saw a cover-up of gargantuan, obvious proportions, and now the jig is up. So she has a lot to answer for regarding Benghazi, but far more than that, now it appears that she's involved in a potential criminal violation and cover-up of what we would call evidence in the destruction of emails on her private server.
Unbelievable. And before we wrap up the part about Benghazi, what is your opinion of your former colleague, Trey Gowdy? How do you think he is handling the investigation, and do you think he is moving swiftly enough in handling that investigation?
Well, I would refer your listeners to a couple of columns written by my friend Andy McCarthy. Andy McCarthy writes for National Review Online. He also writes for PJ Media. And Andy has been talking about the glacial speed that the committee has been running at. The committee, according to Andy, has been constituted for about 10 months. And the purpose of the committee is not to run a criminal investigation. Congress is prohibited from running a criminal investigation. Only the judicial branch can do that, and that's through the, only the Department of Justice can conduct a criminal investigation, and that would be through the executive branch. That must be done. What Congress can do is investigate facts and conduct oversight, and that's primarily a political procedure. I don't mean political in the sense of being pejorative, Republicans against Democrats. What I mean is that the legislative branch has the duty to properly investigate the areas over which it has jurisdiction. For instance, the State Department, whether it is Foreign Affairs or whether it is Judiciary or whether it's the Intelligence Committee. They provide the funding and they make the policy, and they properly need to determine whether the money was spent the way Congress authorized, and second, whether policies were in fact followed. That needs to be done. That's an inherently public process. There's been very few hearings that have been held, and in my opinion, that those hearings should be held soon and quickly, putting all of the evidence on the table for the public to see, and then calling out on the Department of Justice to conduct its own civil or criminal probe.
Certainly, we're going to keep an eye on the Benghazi situation. I don't think this is going to be over. It's certainly going to take a long time, and I think that will be the crucifix, so to speak, on the Obama administration, and what is going to finally be on President Obama's legacy. Don't you agree?
Well, I think President Obama's legacy clearly will be the establishment of lawlessness in the United States. In nearly every realm, the president has far overstepped his boundaries as listed in the Constitution of the United States under Article 2. And I think most egregiously recently, we have seen that overstepping in the realm of the president issuing executive amnesty to illegal aliens, wherein he is fabricating the creation of work permits for over 5 million illegal aliens in the United States. Once the president has done that, and once the GOP Congress fully funded those 5 million plus work permits, now we will see illegal aliens be granted Social Security numbers, driver's license numbers, in addition to the work permits that will allow them access to Medicare benefits, Medicaid benefits, Social Security disability benefits, in addition to numerous other benefits that they'll now be able to take advantage of. Does anyone believe that someone armed with a work permit, a driver's license, and a Social Security number won't have access to the voting booth? In my opinion, this was nothing more than a taxpayer-subsidized voter drive for the Democrat Party for 2016. And I think that clearly that's what the president was trying to do, because in light of Ferguson and all of the racial tensions in the United States today, in part stoked by the policies of President Obama, I don't believe for a moment we're going to see poll workers risk the judgment of the Department of Justice by being accused of racial profiling, by asking anyone to show proof of citizenship papers when they go to file for voter registration. If they have a valid driver's license, if they have a Social Security number, if they have a work permit, I highly doubt any poll worker will be asking for proof of citizenship papers. And I believe that is why we have the potential of seeing an additional 5 million illegal aliens who could be voting in the 2016 election. And that could be enough to throw the election to the Democrat nominee, presumably of which is Hillary Clinton. And to see Hillary Clinton gain office through the votes of potentially 5 million illegal aliens who are not authorized to vote would be truly a travesty and a shame in our system.
Well, it's funny you mentioned, because I think your prediction already came true, because 15 illegal aliens here in the state of California, after a federal probe earlier this week, Michelle, were given amnesty from deportation today, and they are known criminals as well, so they could be potential voters in the upcoming 2016 election. So you certainly know your stuff when it comes to the illegal immigration issue. Now let's move on to D.C. politics briefly. And first question I want to ask you here, a lot of people were shocked that you decided not to rerun for another term and decided to step down last year before the midterm elections last year. Was that because of the gridlock in Washington, D.C.? And I'm not only speaking to Democrats, I'm speaking to Republicans on this issue, because you know what, I've told this my audience many a times that I'm no longer a Republican, that the Republican Party left me, I didn't leave them, and I decided to become a legal nonpartisan here in the state of California. If there was any other state, I would have become a libertarian, because the GOP is currently not the grand old party anymore. They're surely not showing their conservative roots, especially with Speaker Boehner.
Well, I want to encourage people to follow me on Facebook and Twitter. I regularly Facebook and Twitter, and also I have a PAC called Michelle PAC, and I just put a mailing out today for Michelle PAC, and I encourage people to go to michellepac.com. And I talked about that very issue, that it only took 2 terms for the Whigs to lose as a political party and for the Republican Party to take dominance over the Whigs. I don't think any party should get too comfortable. A lot of people are very, very upset by the fact that the Republican Party, which now controls both the Senate and the House, decided they were not going to fight President Obama on his illegal, unconstitutional executive amnesty. In fact, they completely caved and they fully funded Obama's agenda through 2015. So consider this. When Barack Obama came in power, he had a Democrat House, a Democrat Senate, and a Democrat president. That's how we were able to see Obamacare and Dodd-Frank go through. Then we had the House of Representatives flipped, and it went into Republican hands. That seemed like we would be able to stop a certain amount of damage happening with a Republican House. But we were told that that the Republicans only controlled 1/2 of 1/3 of government. In order to tell conservative members of Congress to be quiet, don't expect much, we don't have enough power. Now when voters gave Republicans control of the Senate, once again we're told we don't have enough numbers, we don't have enough Republican senators to overcome a filibuster. There is a Democrat president, the president has his rights, and we've got to step out of the way. And so now Republicans are busy confirming people like Loretta Lynch is the new Attorney General. She did pass out of a committee in the United States Senate and the Judiciary Committee after she already said she believed Obama's unconstitutional amnesty was just fine with her. In other words, this is going to be Eric Holder Part 2 all over again. So Republicans are not pushing back in any way, and I think that Republicans need to recognize there could be a tremendous backlash against them if they don't properly act as goaltenders and stop what President Obama is illegally doing. So throughout his 8 years, even with Republicans controlling the Senate and the House, Obama still may have his entire agenda 100% fully funded. To me, that's a travesty.
Is that why you decided to step down as Congresswoman, because of all this gridlock? You couldn't get anything done? And you know what? You were known as the Queen of the Tea Party. People have said that many of times. You were the first one to stand up and say, if we take control of Congress, we will repeal Obamacare. But you know what? You're the only person who was coming out saying that. And you know what? For people who say that you broke your promise, you can't exactly tell Michelle Bachmann that she broke her promise if she was the only one who was saying that. She needs the whole party behind her. And the likes of the House leadership, the likes of John Boehner, and even former Majority Leader Eric Cantor, they weren't behind you on it. And why do you think Eric Cantor was voted out of office and the likes of Dave Bratt took over his state?
Well, one of the main reasons why I decided to run for President of the United States was to repeal Obamacare. I saw that there weren't very many people on Capitol Hill, and that included Republicans, who had the backbone to actually stand up to all of the special interest groups in Obamacare and repeal that bill and fight for our great health care system. Despite its flaws, America still has the greatest healthcare system in the world, but we're losing it fast because of Obamacare. I could regale your listeners with stories, but we don't have time to do that. I chose not to run. I've given 16 years of my life full time to politics. 2 as a mom at home. We had 5 biological kids and 23 foster kids that we raised. And our foster kids brought a lot of nonsense home in their backpacks. And I was incensed at what I saw. We homeschooled our biological children, and we had them in private school. But in the state of Minnesota, we were prohibited legally from putting our foster children in anything other than the public school. And I was just floored by some of the things that I saw come home in the backpack. And I decided as their mom to fight for my foster children's education. That's really what got me into politics. I wasn't interested in politics. I was a federal tax litigation attorney, and I had enough to do on my plate with all the kids and a business that we started, and I'd started a K-12 charter school. I was a busy person. I didn't need to run for politics. But I was so incensed at what was happening to our nation's education system that I burrowed in, I found out what the problems were, and I alerted people all across the state of Minnesota. We're a very liberal state, Al Franken, for instance, is our U.S. Senator. But in my state, we became the only state that was able to throw out our federal education national standards. And we did that because real people cared about their kids. Liberals and conservatives cared about their kids, and they said, not with my kid you don't. We're not going to teach them this politically correct mash. And so we had a temporary victory, at least in Minnesota. I did that for 2 years, And then I was encouraged to run for the Minnesota State Senate, and I served there for 6 years, and then in Congress for 8 years. So I spent 16 years of my life pouring myself out in public service. And I just felt like I do believe in a citizen legislature, and I do believe in at least self-imposed term limits. And so I pulled out to give someone else a chance, but that doesn't mean that I've left the fight. That's why I'm on your radio show tonight. I was in Washington, D.C. yesterday working on some matters. I'm in Florida today. I'll be giving a big speech on education tomorrow in Florida. I'm continuing to weigh in. I'm continuing to fight on these issues. I'm just doing it from a different perch.
And you know what, Michelle? I'm glad you are doing that. And by the way, that is over in Naples, Florida, speaking at the Eagle Forum luncheon tomorrow. And you're going to be there with the Honorable Phyllis Schlafly, the CEO of Eagle Forum. And please tell her Mr. Miller said hello. I've had the honor of interviewing her on many occasions. And you know what? I can understand your frustration why you decided to leave Congress. You can get more done as a private citizen, Michelle, than you could have as a congresswoman. At least with the current leadership in Congress, I think I'm not the only American here, along with yourself, who is frustrated with the likes of D.C. We tell our D.C. politicians, hey, we want this done. We want you to fight for us, and yet they're not fighting for us.
Well, I think you're echoing the frustration that so many people see, because many, many great people sacrifice to volunteer on campaigns and support local campaigns, and they send people to Washington, D.C., and there are good people there. I want to vouch for there are many, many good people who are sacrificially serving in Congress. There's just not enough. And the problem is, a lot of times Congress can be likened to a big junior high. It's a lot of peer pressure that you get in Washington, and it's very, very expensive to run for office, and money talks. So between money, between the pressure that leadership puts on members, between the negative ads that get run against an individual, at a certain point, people just decide it's not worth it. I'm not going to fight anymore. But for me, I knew why I was running. I knew that I wasn't going to make a career out of being in Washington. I knew who I was. I knew what I believed, and I had a titanium spine. It doesn't mean that I don't know how to compromise. You can't be married 37 years and not know how to compromise. Anybody knows how to compromise, but we're way beyond compromising now. We're talking about a complete and total abdication of our Constitution. And if we abdicate our Constitution, we will no longer look like the gift that the United States was to our generation. And it's changing fast. And we all love America. We all love the freedoms that it's given to us. But in order to continue this life, we have to continue the constitutional freedom. And President Obama chose not to do that. And for some inexplicable reason, the Republicans decided to leave their white gloves on and not fight. This was the time of any time to take off the white gloves and put on brass knuckles and boxing gloves and fight to retain control of our borders and our sovereignty and our Constitution. And instead, unfortunately, the Republicans, together with the Democrats, chose to fund Obama's unconstitutional, illegal executive amnesty. And it will totally change the United States forever. That's not racist to say that. It is to say that American workers deserve to keep their American jobs. Because with 5 million new laborers in the workforce, 5 million new people will be fighting for American jobs, which means employers will bid down the wages and bid down the benefits. So American workers, the ones who are paying the taxes for illegal aliens, they're the ones who are going to be hurt the most. And the children of natural-born Americans will also be the ones who are hurt the most. We have every right to control our borders. We have every right to decide who comes in and when they come in. There is no other nation on earth that is as generous with immigration as the United States. Already today, we allow in over 1 million legal aliens every year, over 1 million. No other country allows that many people in through immigration. In fact, if you add up the amount of immigration that every other country in the world does, all countries combined, they don't even allow in every country of the world added together as many as the United States does in 1 year. So we're beyond generous. Now the American taxpayer is being taken for a ride as a fool and a chump because we have to provide Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security benefits, Social Security disability payments, in all likelihood, food stamps, Obama phones, the whole rest, the gravy train. Obama's rolling out that carpet of entitlement, and the American worker who's suffering already with lower wages is going to have to pay that free.
Can you stay on with a couple more minutes? I've already spoke to our D.C. Bureau. The Exceptional Conservative Show, for those of you tuning in at the top of the hour, will be delayed, but Ken McClinton has graciously given us some extra time with you. Michelle, do you have a couple more minutes to talk with us?
You know, I wish I did, but I have an event here that I need to go to, but I've really enjoyed my time with you, and I just wish you the best, and I wish your audience the best as well.
All right. Well, keep us informed, and we'd love you to come back on sometime to analyze what is going on in D.C., because I don't think anybody knows it better than you. Real quick, before you go, what is your opinion on the current Iran negotiations going on in Switzerland? Real quick, if you can briefly give us a brief summary of what you think about what's going on.
I sat on the Intelligence Committee. There are only 4 nations in the world that the United States designates as state sponsors of terror: Cuba, Syria, Sudan, and Iran. Of those 4 nations, Iran clearly is the most egregious violator of terrorist acts in the world. This is the one nation that President Obama can't do enough. He is tripping over himself right now to make sure that Iran has the ability and capacity to develop a nuclear weapon. And it isn't just one weapon, it is multiple nuclear weapons. And as we speak, Iran already has control over the capital of Yemen, the capital of Lebanon, the capital of Iraq, Baghdad, and also obviously their own capital, as well as Damascus, the capital of Syria. Iran is intent on being the dominant player in the Middle East. If we see Iran, which is responsible for murdering over 1/3 of all of our American soldiers in Iraq, you heard me right, Iran is responsible for murdering 1/3 of all of our U.S. soldiers in Iraq. If they are this dangerous with backing terrorism now when they don't have a nuclear bomb, imagine what they will do when they have it. We don't even have to imagine, because their leader has already tweeted and stated publicly that once they have a nuclear bomb, their intent is to annihilate the Jewish state. They intend to kill every Jew on the planet, and they're going to begin with killing the Jews in Israel. But they also intend to use that nuclear bomb against the United States. In no universe can I imagine any U.S. president ever desiring to make sure that Iran has a nuclear weapon. And Iran will have a nuclear weapon. I was in the chamber last week when Benjamin Netanyahu came to speak to Congress. As a former member of Congress, I have lifetime privileges of being in the chamber. I was the first person, as a matter of fact, who greeted the Prime Minister when he walked through the double doors to give his speech. I stood right by the doors. I greeted him. I thanked him for being there, and I was one of the last people to talk to him before he left the chamber. He said it rightly. He said this agreement that President Obama is desperate to have for some odd reason, this agreement will pave the way for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And they'll be able to have a nuclear weapon in somewhere from 6 months to 1 year's time. Not enough time for the United States to gear up and have a defense. Why do I say that? I say that because President Obama is in the process of hollowing out our U.S. military. He is taking our Navy back to 1917 levels of preparedness. He is taking our Army back to World War II, 1942 levels of preparedness, and he's stripping down our United States Air Force as well. I spoke to experts in December who said that today we have the capability of taking out Iranian nuclear hardware, but potentially by the year 2016, next year, that window may close, and the United States may have so hollowed ourselves out militarily that we may not have the capability of even taking out the Iranian nuclear program. What President Obama is doing to this nation is treasonous as far as I am concerned, and this is more than a bad deal. And I'll end this, and then I need to go. At the White House Christmas, at the White House Christmas party, I knew this would be the last time that I would have the occasion to see the president in my capacity as a member of Congress. And so I decided rather than just having light chit-chat, I would have a substantive conversation. So after we took our pictures as families, I turned to the president and I said, Mr. President, you need to bomb the Iranian nuclear hardware, and you need to do it soon before they get the nuclear weapon. Otherwise, the course of world history will change. And then the president said to me in a patronizing, condescending tone, well, Michelle, it's really not that simple. And then he kind of waved his hand a little bit like I was a know-nothing, and he said, but that's okay. And I thought to myself, you know, Mr. President, it's been publicly reported that you miss over 60% of your daily intelligence briefings. I went to my intelligence briefings. As a member of the Intelligence Committee, I put extra time into reading intelligence products so that I would know what was going on. And so I responded to the President, no, Mr. President, this is your watch. And if Iran has a nuclear weapon and bombs under your watch, the course of world history will change. Merry Christmas, Mr. President. And then I left and I walked away. Obviously, the President and I completely disagree on this. But if 535 members of the House and the Senate with one voice would say to the President, we're way beyond sanctions now. Sanctions work to hurt Iran. Sanctions won't stop this nuclear program. The only thing that will stop the nuclear program will be the United States militarily taking out that nuclear program. It's happened before. In Iraq, a nuclear facility was taken out in the 80s. In Syria, a nuclear facility was taken out. In Libya, a nuclear program was halted. We've done this before, and Iran for over 20 years has violated every UN resolution, every deadline they've been given, they've violated. They are clearly on the march to have nuclear weapons, and so many that no nation could ever turn them back. We could see a jihadi power, which is a Shia, that's Iranian. There are two forms of Islam, Sunni and Shia. Sunni is the Islamic State. Shia is Iran. Iran right now is fighting the fight of the Battle of Tikrit against the Islamic State because the Shia Muslims hate the Sunni Muslims and they want to destroy them too. Iran is on the march right now, and this is a religious goal for them. They believe that by bringing this destruction about, that they will usher in their, what they call the 12th Imam, and that's their religious leader. And then they believe that the religion of Islam will dominate the entire earth. We think that sounds far-fetched. It's not even in our capacity to think that any nation would want to do something like that. But that is the belief of the Iranians. And Sun Tzu wrote in The Art of War, in order to win a battle, you need to know yourself and you need to know your enemy. Here in the United States, we are being stripped of knowing anything about our own country's history, our positive history. All we ever hear is the negative history about the United States. But we also are stripping ourselves of truly understanding who this enemy is, so that every time we see a despicable terror attack, our president says something like, Islam is a religion of peace. He will say that, for instance, with the Jewish kosher market that was attacked in France, he'll say that these were just random people killing other random people. That's not true at all. These are people who are clearly targeting Jews, but anyone who is not of their religious faith. It is the absolute faith of intolerance. That's what radical Islam is, an intolerant faith. And what we have to do is defeat this idea of this intolerant faith. And President Obama, for some unknown reason, doesn't want the American people to know what the true motivations are of the Iranian dictator. I can't imagine for a moment that our president has not been briefed on what the religious motivations are behind the Shia Muslims and the Sunni Muslims. But at this point, what I would say to you, from what I have read and what I have observed and from the briefings that I've had, no one knows the thoughts and intentions of a person's heart, but from the words and rhetoric of President Obama and from his actions, they line up very clearly in a pattern to demonstrate two things. President Obama, throughout his presidency, has lifted up the agenda and advanced the agenda of radical Islam, and at the same time, he's cut the legs out of our main ally, Israel. That's just an objective determination of what the fruit has been of President Obama's rhetoric and his actions. And it will come, I believe, with deadly consequences if Iran obtains a nuclear weapon. So I want to thank you so much for having me on tonight, and we'll plan to do this again soon. But I invite people to come and join me at Michelle Bachmann at my Facebook, my Twitter. Go to michellebachmann.com, michellepack.com, Team Bachmann, the different websites that are out there. Google me and come and join my sites, and you can get more regular updates.
Thank you so much, Michelle Bachmann. And if you are in the Naples, Florida area, join the Eagle Forum's 35th annual luncheon. Michelle Bachmann is their keynote speaker, along with Phyllis Schlafly. That's tomorrow, March the 13th. For more information, go to eagleforum.org. Michelle Bachmann, thank you so much for joining us. We hope to have you on again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. All right, folks, and that does it here for this extended edition of the Evan Miller Report. For Corey Evan, I'm Jason Miller. For those of you listening in on podcast, the Entertainment Report will follow on podcast due to time constraints. I thank Ken McClinton of the Exceptional Conservative Show for allowing us to go along with Ms. Bachmann tonight. And again, I thank Michelle Bachmann for giving up about a 45 minutes worth of her time to join us on the program tonight to talk about the multiple issues we've discussed tonight. And for those of you listening in on podcast this evening, here is Corey Evans' Entertainment Report that could not make it to live air due to our extended interview with Michelle Bachmann. Corey, take it away.
I thank you, Jay. The Duchess of Cambridge has made one of her final public appearances before she gives birth to her second child. She visited Ealing Studios in West London, where she met the cast of the hit show Downton Abbey. Nicholas Witchell reports.
The fictional place that is Downton Abbey has never had a royal visitor, but today the Duchess of Cambridge, a fan of the series we're told, and now just 6 or so weeks from the birth of her second baby, visited the studios where much of the drama is filmed, and stepped into the dramatic world of Downton. The reality of Downton is, of course, rather more down-to-earth. Catherine was shown the hair and makeup and wardrobe departments, and there, lurking as butlers do, was Downton's butler, Mr. Carson, the actor Jim Carter. Catherine was then taken into the studios to see some of the scenes being filmed and to meet more members of the cast. In Lady Mary Crawley's bedroom, she met the actors Michelle Dockery and Joanne Froggatt. Finally, below stairs, in the servants' hall, a conducted tour of one of Britain's most successful dramas for someone who came across as a knowledgeable fan.
She was very enthusiastic and knew all about it, which was great. So it made... hopefully it made it fun for her, as much fun for her as it was for us.
She left with a cake, presented by who else? Downton's cooks, Mrs. Patmore and Daisy. As royal visits go, it can safely be said that this was one that the Duchess will remember. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News, at Ealing Studios.
I thank you very much, Nicholas. And Jay, I'm sure you're excited about that news, because you're a big Downton Abbey fan. Next time we hang out, Jay, we've got to have a Downton Abbey marathon. Any rate, Alabama investigators looked into whether the recent deal to publish Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird sequel, but they have closed the inquiry, a state official said Thursday. Alabama Securities Commission Director Joseph Borg sent an investigator to speak with Lee at the request of the Alabama Department of Human Resources. His department handles complaints of elder abuse. He asked his investigators to look into the situation because of their expertise in financial matters. The surprise news that the 88-year-old author would publish a second book prompted speculation over whether she is capable of giving consent to the publication. To Kill a Mockingbird has sold over 40 million copies worldwide, so it's going to be interesting to see, assuming the publication goes forward, how many copies the new one will sell. And you know what? I might just buy a copy. A physical copy. I like physical stuff over digital because, honestly, I don't have enough room for it on my new phone. It's full of games, that's why. And from the BBC, Star Wars producers have announced the name of the new standalone film to be directed by Gareth Edwards and starring Felicity Jones. Rogue One is the title of the first film in a series of big-screen adventures exploring characters from the core Star Wars saga. No details have been released on the character to be played by the Theory of Everything star Jones. Rian Johnson has been asked to write and direct Star Wars Episode 8. The film, which will follow on from Star Wars The Force Awakens out later this year, will be released on May 26, 2017. That date and the Rogue One title was revealed today in San Fran by Disney Chairman and CEO Bob Iger at a shareholders meeting. Edwards' film begins shooting this summer in London and is due for release on December 16, 2016. Right, that's our entertainment report for today. Hope to entertain you again tomorrow. Till then, I'm Corey Evans saying, Jay, you've got a lot to look forward to. Hope this all makes you happy.
Again, for Corey Evan, I'm Jason Miller saying so long from San Diego, and I hope to speak with you tomorrow. Good night, everybody.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.